Hello, welcome to our third webinar. We're just going to get started in a few minutes. So if you're here early, well done, hello. Time to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're up to in your PPR studies. In fact, see the chat box off to the right, say hello, tell us who you are, and tell us what your last lesson was before you had to stop learning to fly. We'll get started in just a few minutes. If you're just joining us, hello, welcome to our webinar. We're keen to get to know you guys a bit better. So get involved in the chat box off to the right of the screen and tell us if you're nervous about anything going back to flight school. Tell us a bit about your previous last lessons. We've got Andrew in the chat. Hi, Andrew. Michael Parker was up to flapless and glide approaches. So some advanced stuff in the circuit. Great stuff. Put in the chat box there what you were up to last. So if you're just joining us, hello, we're just going to start in a few minutes. Before we get started, we just want to get to know you guys a little bit better while we're waiting. So head to the chat box in the right-hand side of the screen and let us know if you're worried about anything in particular going back to learning to fly, where you think you'll probably get up to, and also really tell us where you're up to before you had to stop learning to fly. Let us know in the chat box off to the right. Say hello to us. Yeah, Phil's done 19 hours with us, so he's well into his PPL, and he says, is it normal to feel apprehensive? And yeah, absolutely, especially after a big gap. We're going to talk about some of the psychological aspects of getting back to flying, because it's kind of, we are all ruled by our brain in one way or another. Andrew was on circuits and he was ready to go solo, and we just hadn't quite got there before we all had to stop doing what we are doing. And same for Phil. He says, yeah, he was also about to go solo. So really frustrating, I can imagine, if you're about to go solo and then the coronavirus pandemic hits. So if you're just joining us, hello, welcome to our webinar. We're just about to get started in probably another minute or so. And but just introduce yourself in the chat box off to the right of the screen there. Let us know where you last got up to in your training. Let us know how you feel about going back to learning to fly. And we will get started in just a few minutes. Andrew West said only had 3 lessons, so probably starting again. And that's kind of the right attitude, although you might be pleasantly surprised how much you remember, but there will be some stuff that you've probably forgotten. Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, that's normal, as we'll talk about in a second. Phil says here he's gone solo, he's done PFLs, and which are practice forced landings, comes along in the later stage of the private pilot's license course. And he was about to start to go cross country, which is a whole new bunch of skills, learning to not just fly very accurately, but also do lots of maths and map reading while you are at it. Yep, some good stuff. Keep it coming in that chat, guys. I think it's time to get started with our webinar. Welcome. Hello, welcome to our webinar. If you're in training, then this is probably for you. This is the webinar for you as we get back started again. If you're not in training, maybe you've got your PPL license, maybe you're even a flight instructor and looking for some insight, then great, welcome to this webinar. I'm sure there'll be loads you can get from this. There's also some stuff, some previous webinars aimed more at non-students. Go back to the Red Hill Aviation YouTube account and have a look at some of those. But welcome, hello, my name's Finn. I'm here with Dan and Harry, who you can see on the coming up soon. We're all instructors at Red Hill Aviation. And well, after the last lockdown, when we all got back to flying, we were talking about how we worked with quite a few students who got a little bit frustrated. They got back in the cockpit after a fairly long break, and they weren't really performing where they expected to be. We also saw some PPL license holders, those who fly commercially, and us as instructors, sort of being not up to the standard that we would expect to be at, and not up to the standard that we were at before the pandemic started. And I think Dan and Harry, we've spoken about how we'd include ourselves in that group. And I think everyone watching would agree with me that the less we do something, the worse we get at doing it. And well, this evening we're gonna look at how you can minimize that disruption to your training and how you can maximize the outcome. Really, what we want to try and help you arrive prepared for these lessons, help allay any concerns, help you turn up at your lessons confident again, and really get you back operating at your previous level in less time than you might have done. The next hour is going to be rammed full of hints and tips about things you can do that will help. Some of those you may be doing already, in which case, great. If you just learn 1 or 2 tips from this, it's going to help you getting back up to speed quicker, then this will have been sort of time well spent. If you watched our webinar a couple of weeks ago, which was aimed at PPL holders, you'll see some similar themes. And that's deliberate. As a licensed or experienced pilot, you face similar issues to students who are learning to fly. It's a similar activity. There's going to be a bit more knowledge here devoted to PPL students, and we're not going to assume that you have any sort of prior knowledge. This is open to all abilities, and I want it to be a real safe space. So feel free to ask any question you think of in the chat box. Those of us, me, Dan and Harry, are going to be monitoring it throughout. We'll take some questions at the end as well. There's no stupid question. All the questions you have in your head, if we haven't answered them in this seminar, me, Dan or Harry will have asked ourselves at some point in our flight training as well. So please get involved in that. A bit later, Harry's going to explore motivation and ways to keep us pumped up and in the mood to study, even when the weather's not as it is today, or even when you get a cancellation due to maybe an instructor's unavailable or a plane not being available. And Dan's got some really great tips about preparing for your flight lessons in ways that I think will really wow your flight instructor when you next see them. So, and at the end, we'll spend about 15 minutes answering some of your questions. So we'll talk for about an hour, and then we'll take some questions at the end. First, I want to talk about some problems, and specifically some problems with being human, of which we all are. And the first thing I want to talk about is capacity. And if you saw my previous seminar, we spoke about this a bit, but this I think is going to be key to us all getting back in the air safely. And well, this is the situation really. So before the pandemic, if this is how much capacity we could hold, we bring in a certain amount of stress and anxiety just from our life. Maybe it's things about our family life or our professional life. And so that reduces the amount of capacity we have. But normally in pre-pandemic life, not a lot. And then it takes a while, but when you're flying at PPL level, even flying straight and level can take up quite a lot of your capacity. And then what will happen in our flight lessons is us as instructors will pour in some new skills to your capacity cup, and we want to keep it somewhere near the top. We don't want it overflowing. We don't want you to feel as if you've got overloaded, but we want to really maximize your experience in that lesson. And so we try to keep this cup fairly full. But I think the problem after this lockdown is going to be that we're all bringing a lot more stressors from life into it. A lot more concerns about professional life, family life, money, maybe more concerns about health, even if it's just us sanitizing our hands a bit more. So we're going to bring in extra stress like that. And also, we haven't flown straight and level for months and months and months, some of us possibly even over a year. And so we shouldn't kid ourselves that this is going to be easy. It's going to take up a lot more of our capacity than we're used to it taking up. And then if we as instructors try to put a new skill on top of that at the moment, it's just going to go out the window because we're up to capacity. And really what we need to do is find ways to reduce the amount of capacity we're using here. Find ways to reduce the amount of capacity we need for flying straight level, which probably really is practice. And the reason I'm mentioning this because it's kind of obvious, you kind of know it in your heart of hearts, is just to really manage everyone's expectations. And we can't go straight in to the first lesson doing exactly what you did before. We're going to have to build back up to it, just as I think Phil in chat was saying. So what we're going to look at today is ways that we can build up quicker, but there will always be a bit of building up. The next thing I want to talk about is our memory. A lot of time has gone past, and human memory is fascinating. It's still not entirely understood by science, but this is essentially what they understand. And if you think about all the data that your brain absorbs, so every little color that goes in your eye, every sound you hear throughout the day that's decoded by your brain, every taste that your tongue tastes, that's all so much information that your brain deals with. And in reality, so little of it even goes into your short-term memory, never mind your long-term memory. And that's a good thing, because there's no point remembering, say, I don't know, yesterday's weather forecast today, because it's not really useful information. And the problem with being human is that most of our information we process goes into our short-term memory, and very little goes into our long-term memory. And the information that does go into our long-term memory, it's not really there forever. Human brains, I think, have evolved in a way that means we forget things, even in our long-term memory, over time, which does make us very adaptable to new situations, to new environments. There's a lot of positives to this. We're able to keep the most up-to-date information on the saber-toothed tiger predators that we come across. As they change, we're able to have new long-term information in our memory about them and the way they behave. And this is applicable in modern life as well. But essentially, we get rid of data that's no longer relevant. So how do we refresh this long-term memory? How do we keep this long-term memory going? How do you remember something forever, essentially? Well, the trick is you need to go and remember it frequently. So by accessing that old memory, whatever it be, whether it be something to do with flying or whether it be something to do with an old friend from school, if you go in and access that memory, then it essentially gets rejuvenated and it becomes easier to remember next time, and it lasts longer. So the key really is to just remembering things, accessing items in your memory more often, and that's going to stop any sort of a fade or forgetfulness happening. So that's what's going to happen to our memory, and we're going to talk about ways you can revise things and things you can revise. Dan's going to talk about that in a few minutes. The next thing I want to talk about is more of our motor skills. We sometimes call this skill fade. Now, strangely, motor skills aren't forgotten anywhere near as easily as memories are. You're probably aware of that phrase, oh, it's just like riding a bike. It's just like getting back on your bike and riding it. And, well, that is true, but we would expect some small mistakes in any physical activity that you haven't done often. So we would expect some small mistakes, such as maybe, not deliberate mistakes, but mistakes in maybe reaching for the wrong control or doing slightly the wrong movement, but you'll catch yourself in time when you're doing it. And it's these small slips that you're going to find are more common. And really, we just need to practice the skill to remove that. We just need to build back up to where we were before. There's also some physiological factors, big long word, stuff about your body, basically. We've been locked down for a while, and our body hasn't been used to being in a place like an aircraft. We've been in our homes that are, well, they don't have any G-force in our living rooms. There's no turbulence in our kitchens, and hopefully your house is a lot quieter than a Cessna or a Piper aircraft. So the environment that we're going to be in and you're going to be learning in is an environment that you haven't been in for a while. And just like in the early days when you probably got in your first few lessons, when you got these planes and you put on the big headphones and it's really loud and it's shaking around and your instructor's saying, oh, don't worry, just to raise the nose, move the control column towards you. And you think, how is this possible? And after not very long, you become very used to this environment. But we haven't been in that environment for a while, so it's going to take a bit of getting used to. And also, we've all been fairly relaxed over the past however long. We've been made to stay inside. I'm sure lots of you have been going out getting daily activity, and some of you may have been involved in some of the heroic efforts, and so you may have been quite active. But most of us will have had a much lower general activity level than we had before. And that activity level is going to build up. So I really recommend when you go back to flying, I know some of you will be really, really eager, but I'd recommend against booking 2, 3, 4 lessons a day or whatever you would like. And start just the first few weeks, just book 1 lesson a day at maximum, really, because your body's not going to be used to doing the commute to the flight school, being away from home, being up on your feet for hours and hours and hours, and being in the learning environment as well. And so all of this is just going to add more stress into that cup, and then you're going to be overwhelmed even sooner. So really build up those activity levels. And so I sound quite negative so far, and there's not really anything, I think, more frustrating to students and anyone that's learning anything than feeling that you're not progressing. And we call this educators call this a learning plateau. And this is actually kind of common. Every time you learn something, you have a big burst of learning at first, and then what feels like a plateau, but actually you're just getting used to and honing that ability or that skill. And then you end up feeling like you make big improvements. But this plateau can be quite difficult, quite frustrating. And so it's at this point I really want to consider what motivates us, because this is going to be the point here where we feel like we're not achieving anything, where we're going to have to rely on our motivation in a big way. And well, motivation's a really funny one, because I think we can safely say that out of the ways to get motivated, chaining yourself to the desk with the big stack of PPL books probably isn't one. Bribery and blackmail, we know if you're a parent, or if you yourself have tried to bribe yourself with things to get things done, it doesn't really work. A nagging flight instructor will probably also not be the most motivating thing ever. So it's now I want to really consider why you want the PPL, why you want whatever it is you're studying for. It's probably not to please your flight instructor. It's probably not because you're addicted to spending money. There's probably something else about it. So I want you to take a second now and just think about what your motivation is. And Harry's going to talk about what some of those reasons might be. But actually, I'd really be really interested to see some of them, if you're willing to share them with us and everyone here. If you just put them in the chat box to the right, what your sort of motivation is. And I'm going to pass over to Harry, who's going to talk more about what they may be.
Cool, thanks, Finn. So thanks, everyone. Pop below in that chat box anything that has motivated you to come flying. Why did you sign up to start your PPL with us at Red Hill? What was it that got that spark going originally? So let's start having a little think about what that was, because we've been off for such a long time now that it can be quite easy to forget why we started this sort of journey in the first place. Why are we here now? And it's really fundamental, because to get you back in the zone of learning, you've got to have a goal, because you can't just learn for the sake of it. You've got to aim to achieve something at the end of it. And that way you can also measure your progress towards it. Without progress measurement, progress tracking, you've got no idea if you're going forwards, going backwards, sideways, or staying still, really. So have a little comment below. Why did we want to fly? A lot of people saying, generally speaking, that they have just this buzz, this passion for aviation. So get commenting on there. And in this section, I'm just going to talk to you about a few areas that are really the human factors. And we're going to start with this area of motivation. We're then going to touch on some possible barriers to returning to your training, things that could get in the way, and what we can do, what you can also do to help that. Managing workload is a big part of that. You saw Finn's capacity bucket. So how can we make our bucket bigger, or our bucket content smaller? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to have a little note on exams there. So Phil's always had an ambition to fly. Ed's been in the Air Cadets, so that's cool. It's a really common route for getting started. Also gliding, if anyone's done gliding before, it's a great entry pathway. Charlie wanted to obtain his PPL before he turned 50 in the summer. Fantastic, that's a great goal. So it's got a kind of a time bound on there as well. That's cool. So why did you want to be a pilot? Let's have a think about this. Was it maybe that you had a real sense of adventure, that you thought, I want to go off and explore places. I want to go on holiday, or I want to maybe take my family or friends with me and go somewhere nice for lunch or dinner or something like that. Off to La Touquet maybe, who knows? Or maybe you fancied your chances of going commercial. You thought that it would be cool to turn left instead of right when you go on board the commercial airliner. You could even join Dan up there maybe. He's one of our instructors. He's going to talk to you in a little while about the actual preparation methods you can use before flying. And he's got some brilliant tips that he uses with his airline as well. So maybe that was your goal, to go commercial. Or maybe you wanted to technically challenge yourself and go and visit some technical airports where maybe the runway is shorter, or it's at higher altitude, or there's some unique aspect about it. Maybe it wasn't really a case of wanting to go commercial, but you just like the idea of trying a new skill. So that could have been you wanted to better your hand-eye skills, or you wanted to get yourself an instrument rating one day maybe, and just push yourself, see what you could achieve within yourself. Or maybe, as is with I've had a few people say here, it's just that pure ambition, that drive, some innate passion for flying. And that's really there for pretty much everyone that I've flown with, that has got this underlying drive to want to fly, and maybe leading on to aerobatics or vintage aircraft flying down the line, who knows? But whatever it is, you've got to have in your head that idea of why you wanted this license in the first place, because that's what's going to be the kickstart to get you back to the club. If you've flown with us before at Red Hill, you know that we have the challenge of the weather here in the southeast of the UK. It can be lovely, can also be rubbish, and you can get to the club and sometimes you'll just be cancelled on the spot because of the weather, or you'll even know before you leave. It can be a bit disheartening, particularly if you've had such a long time off and then we get a period of snow, which seems to be forecast at the moment, for example, coming up. That could be quite disheartening for you with regards to coming back to flying. So have that strong goal of motivation in your head and keep that with you, just as I focus on this next bit here, which is with regards to where we are now. So this pandemic has had a number of effects on people's physical and mental health. And the latest report, which is quite interesting, from the Office for National Statistics. So this is looking at literally just over the last couple of weeks, has shown that 62% of people in the UK are worried about how the pandemic is affecting them. And I'm sure most of us would agree that we're in that bubble. It's a high percentage. It's had a strong effect on our lives, and it is contributing to our own workload and stress levels. That's a fact. Okay. But think about it a bit further. So ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being completely over the moon, couldn't be happier, how satisfied are you with your life nowadays? And you can see from the graph here that the general consensus at the moment is that we're not at the level we were at, even after the first lockdown. Its general mood is quite low. So what can we do about this? How can we, pick ourselves up? Well, on the 12th of April, you can start flying with us again. You can get yourself booked in at Red Hill, and hopefully that'll give you a nice bit of a goal. So, Charlie, we can get you working towards that PPL by the summer. This really ties into this question about how satisfied you feel about the things that you do in life. How much fulfillment do they give you? And a lot of people saying that just general things that you used to do before, that you used to value, the whole pandemic has shifted your perspective on things. And maybe that's made flying more or less important than it was before. We completely understand that. We're going to talk in a little bit more detail about priorities on the next page. But essentially, I want you to ask yourself this question. Does the thought of returning to flying make you excited or apprehensive after all this time? And that's the key here, because we want to get around that apprehension. So let's explore that possible apprehension in a little bit more detail to get you really excited to come back. So possible barriers could be time. Maybe you've had a slight shift in your situation. Maybe you have more or less time to enjoy flying as you had before. You might have a new job or no job. And if that's the case, that you've got less time to dedicate to your flying, then as you would know, you can just book in as and when you would like to. A lot of you might be concerned that that would degrade the course quality, and the footprint would extend even further because you're going to need more lessons to keep that repetition in there. But we can give you suitable material, which Dan is going to talk in a bit more detail about, to do in between lessons to bridge those gaps and keep the standard really high for you. Maybe it's cost that's a possible apprehension factor. And this could be down to, again, loss of job or furloughing, change in your income levels, or just even general concern that now you need to fly more to get back to where you were before. We had a few comments there from people at the start of this webinar in the chat, and they were saying that they think they might need to go back to the start. And yes, it probably is the case that we'll do a bit of refreshing because you've not flown in such a long time. It's no good expecting to be at the stage you were at before, because there will have been a little bit of regression. However, we'll only do what is required, of course, for your own individual circumstances. So we'll look at it on a case-by-case basis for each student. Perhaps your last lesson, you were in the circuit, and we'd take you back to do some general handling. That's the likely course of action before we then carry on in the circuit where it's really busy. Or maybe you're off to do some nav, in which case, again, we might take you back into the circuit and to do some general handling as well before we proceed with the next bit of your training. So just be reassured that we're going to do what we need to do, but not more than we need to do to get you back to the level that you were at before. There's also a point I want to make here, which is that the PPL course, the minimum hours is 45 and 25 of that is dual, okay? So above that footprint, there is scope to do additional training in there as and where you require it individually. So don't be worried about this, guys, at all. If you have got any concerns about cost, or you're unsure of costs going forward, just have a chat with the guys at operations, and they've got all the figures there. They're also on our website, okay? I've mentioned about the mental health aspect. There's also the physical health. I saw a report just today on the news. A lot of people are reporting that they've had long COVID quite recently. And there's some symptoms of this which can extend into your retention of your motor skills and memory. And this is something that we're well aware of. The only thing I want to say here is, if you've got any concerns here, you've had the virus potentially, or some adverse reactions to the vaccine, which is highly unlikely, but might have happened, just go and have a chat with your AME before you go any further. There might be this general anxiety that we've mentioned previously, or maybe if you wanted to go commercial and now you're looking at the state of the airline industry and you're thinking about other options, you might be now looking at doing something a bit different, and that's totally fine as well. And if that's the case, then just let us know, and we're always happy to adjust it's your training, it's your course, it's your money, so we're here to train you on the time frame that you require and would like. A little note as well, just on that physical aspect. It really does pay to look after your own physical health in terms of preparing you so that you're ready to learn. So if you've got your first lesson back, or maybe you're coming up to a test or whatever, this is a general tip that can help, is actually the day before, do a little bit of exercise. Nothing incredibly strenuous, but just do something that's going to make you tire yourself out a little bit. And it can really prepare you and set you up nicely for a good sleep, and B, it just makes your body start to get yourself ready to do some learning the next day. It's a really good tip. Priorities might have changed. I mentioned this before, things could have changed in your life quite significantly over the last year, and flying might now be a lot more important to you. You might be really, really buzzing to come back, and that's what we're really hoping for. But if you're a little bit apprehensive, that's fine. Like Finn said, a good tip is to just gradually build yourself back up again there. Or If you decide that you want to leave it and come back to it at another point down the line, then that's also absolutely fine also. And confidence. So we've not flown in a while, skills will naturally fade. And now you might be thinking, oh, I've got to work really hard to get to where I was before. But you're going to have to work hard anyway to get through the rest of the license. And those skills will come back very quickly as well. So really, it's nothing for you to have any undue concern about. The thing that I'd say here, top tip, take things nice and slowly and just don't be too harsh on yourself. Have realistic expectations of where you might be coming back. So a little bit more detail on how we forget things and learn things. So you can see on this curve here that the pink line is a task that you do for the first time. So when you learn something initially, you retain a lot of it. And then it very quickly, within seconds, starts to fade away if you don't repeat it. But if you do repeat it, you get a new line. And then if you repeat it again, you get another one, another one. And what that's showing is that you retain more and for longer with each repetition of the skill. So in other words, we reinforce learning through this repetition and you get better at doing it. That's why we do it. So if you don't repeat the new skill, you will fade in terms of your motor skills, but actually they are the ones that last the longest. The things that will disappear much quicker are your judgment and anticipation. So how does that relate to your flying? Well, those of you that are in the early stages, perhaps you are learning about climbing and descending, and you're thinking about climbing, but you haven't thought about the lookout and you go jump straight into it. So it's little things like that. It could be that you're in the circuit and you're not quite sure if you're too high or too low because it's been such a long time since you've judged that perception. So it's these skills that that we're going to have to work a little bit more on as we come back. And obviously, as we know, in order to fly the best that we can, we need to be thinking well ahead of the aircraft. So these are really critical skills. A couple of ways that you can think about improving those and getting those geared up ready for a return to flying. Dan's going to talk in a lot more detail about just now, so stay tuned for that. There could be some possible regression, as we've mentioned, but some general tips that could help: revise the lessons that you've already done. So if you've already done some circuits, have a look back at circuits, but also go back over your first few lessons of climbing, descending, turning, and your slow flight as well in there. If you find some areas that you're less familiar on, for example, say you don't remember the speeds in the circuit, then you know that that's a key area that you can sit down and whichever learning method works for you, if it's writing them out, covering them up and having another look in an hour, or perhaps you're drawing a picture of the circuit and labeling the speeds, we could just be sitting there doing something called armchair flying, which I'm going to leave Dan to speak in a lot more detail about shortly. These are all good methods. Prepare for these refresher lessons upon your return. Give yourself lots of preparation in advance, plenty of sleep the night before, and rock up nice and ready to go on the day. So prepare early and thoroughly. That will help you manage that capacity bucket, give you the most capacity to deal with a higher workload than you would be used to. Also, for those of you that are a bit further on in the course, it's really useful to think about some what-if scenarios, and you can just do this on the ground. You can think about perhaps if you're into the navigation stage, you could think about if I was carrying a passenger and they were starting to feel unwell, what would I do at this stage of this nav journey? How would I manage an in-flight diversion? Or you could think about emergency situations such as an engine failure. These are all useful things to get ourselves thinking about some of the rarer stuff that happens when flying, but when it does happen, you need to be best prepared for it. And it's also when you're learning a new skill like, say, stalling, you might be a lot more focused on that in the time and moment than when you're thinking about the engine failures and engine fires. So to start thinking about that now on the ground is a really good time. Look after yourself. I've mentioned that one already, and take your checks nice and slowly and carefully. So use your checklist. Use your thumb on the check if that helps. Read it out and follow it nice and systematically. This also includes your walk around as well. We've spoken a lot about threats. If you've seen our previous webinars, we've got some great stuff on those. So make sure you consider the threats, how you might mitigate those throughout the flying. There'll also be a few changes in the way that we operate when we return compared to when you last came and flew with us. So make sure you're well clued up with these, and Finn is going to detail these a bit later on. As always, guys, if in any doubt, just come and chat with us. We're nice and friendly. We're here to help you out. Same with the guys at Ops and any of the other instructors there as well. So any doubts, just come and ask us, okay? And we just want to see you get off and away, just like that. Great. So final note from me is on exams. Some of you will be all the way through your exams, in which case, brilliant, good stuff. You're well on your way to finishing off. So that's great. Some of you might have only just started or not started at all. That's also fine. But now, if you've got the motivation, think back to that first slide, which picture is relevant for you. Now is a good time to get ahead on your theoretical knowledge studies if you've got that drive and motivation. So what can I recommend? Well, it depends where you're at in the course. Remember that for your first solo, you need to have done your human performance exam, as well as air law and operations. And then when you're a bit further down the course, then you need to have done your navigation and meteorology in time for your first solo now. If you've sat any exams previously under the EASA system, you'll be aware, or you might not be aware, but I'll tell you now anyway, that we have left, the UK has left EASA. So don't worry, your exams are still valid for the issue of a UK license until December 2022. If you do require any help with your studies, then come and chat with your instructors. We've really enjoyed doing these webinars. We've got another one to come next week, which is on RT, and I hope that you'll find it really useful as well. Some really, really good tips in there. We've done some previously, which are on local procedures and airspace. And we've got a lot more content that we could put out there in the future. So if any of you would like to see more of these webinars, or you'd like one-to-one tuition from any of us here, or all of us here, then get in touch and let us know. On our last webinar, we're going to put a little feedback form in, so you can give us a little bit of feedback on what you'd like to see. But if you'd like some theoretical tuition, come and let us know, or book in through operations, and we'll be more than happy to help you. Okay, so that's it from me. If anyone's got any questions on anything I've said here, then please pop it in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer towards the end in the Q&A. I hope you've enjoyed that. And it's over to Dan now to give you a load of useful tips.
Thanks very much, Harry. Before I start, I just wanted to address one of the questions that was asked earlier on. It was from Phil. He said, 19 hours at Redhill. Is it normal to be apprehensive? Well, the answer to that is yes, absolutely. It's you know, we are human, as Finn said, and you haven't done something for a long time. So yes, if you're feeling apprehensive, that's absolutely normal. Now, I spent the last few days in a simulator back at EasyJet, and I was talking to a captain on Monday. He's flown with the company for 28 years and has had the last year off, as many of us have. And he was feeling incredibly apprehensive about going back. So you think, gosh, if he's got 28 years of experience and he's feeling apprehensive, of course, if you're 3 lessons into your PPL, it's only natural. So hopefully the things we're saying today are going to help you sort of get back into the groove of it. But really, all I can say is those first few lessons, you know, we're here to guide you through your PPL, but ultimately it's your journey. So if there's stuff that you want to cover, or even if on that first lesson, all you want to do is just get up in the air, maybe have half an hour, just, you know, refreshing things, just say to your instructor and we'll sort of tailor it towards what you need. Don't feel like you're going to be jumping in at the deep end, doing the next lesson straight away, because that's absolutely not going to be the case. But anyway, I'm going to talk about now how you're going to prepare for that first lesson back. So for those of you that are booked in with us, I'm really looking forward to seeing you all again. For those of you that haven't, then obviously from the 12th of April, you can start booking back in. So what sort of things can you be doing between now and your first lesson back? Well, there's loads of things you can revise, and you're probably looking at that stack of PPL books thinking, gosh, what can I actually do that's useful to those first few lessons back? Well, really, the key things that you can be focusing your attention on, as Harry said, think about those aircraft speeds. You know, if you're on the takeoff roll on your first lesson and you're thinking about the speed and you go, oh God, what speed am I supposed to be flying? Obviously, that's going to detract from the actual action of taking off, or if you're, you know, doing other exercises. So have those in your mind, you know, try and remember the speeds for the aircraft you're flying. You can have a little reminder on your knee board if you need it. And obviously you can ask us as well, but it's really, really useful to have those memorized. Checklists. So make sure you've got your checklist for when you go flying. If you haven't got one of the Red Hill ones, just ask James or Reese. They're going to give you one if you have got one of these Pooley's ones. Radio calls, really usefully. We've got a webinar next week about radio telephony, as Harry said. It's probably one of the things that a lot of you are feeling most anxious about going back. You might be happy with the flying element and that comes back to you, but actually, you know, if you spend your whole lesson really worried about making that radio call, then the things you can do on the ground beforehand will just put you at ease before you actually have to do it. So really recommend the stuff we've got coming up next Tuesday. Whether you're a PPL holder or a student, you know, it's relevant to everybody. And finally, I'd really recommend head on to Google, or you could buy one of these and just print out a picture of a cockpit. It sounds silly, but you just familiarize yourself with the environment that you're going to be put back in. As Finn said, you know, you haven't been in an aircraft for quite a while. So familiarize yourself with where everything is, you know, where's the carpy, where's the mixture, where's the landing light, things like that. That will just make your first lessons back that little bit easier. You know, you can instinctively reach for something as opposed to looking down, thinking about where it is. And then, you know, we asked you earlier on, you know, what was your last lesson with us? And there was some fantastic answers. You know, we've got a whole breadth of experience with us at the moment, which is fantastic. But, you know, where were you last before you flew? Were you in straight and level? Did you go forward into the circuit? Were you thinking about navigation? You know, were you near the end of the course? So looking back at the last things that you've done will be able to refresh you really nicely. So memory checklists are things that hopefully, if you're in the latter stages of your course, you should know. And obviously, if you're going solo, these are definitely things that you need to have. You probably learnt them once upon a time and have completely forgotten them. So just worth refreshing yourself on things like the pre-landing checklist. What is a Hazel check? What does Hazel stand for? What does FRIDA stand for? When would you do a FRIDA check, for example? What is the standard stall recovery? You know, really, really important things. And obviously, the other things you need to think about are the emergency checklists. So I'm not going to run through these now, but these are little prompts for you to think, actually, I can't remember what Hazel stands for. I'm going to go and think about that before my first lesson. So Harry mentioned this earlier on, and it may sound a bit trivial, but armchair flying, what is it? Well, you can actually sit at home, and before you even think about flying, go through in your mind the procedure of which, you know, flying is very procedural. You can think about the order of which you would do things and how you would do them without actually being in an aeroplane. So you can think about the techniques and how you would fly. Obviously, you can think about a takeoff, you know, you can pretend to be sat on the runway ready to go and you think, right, I've been cleared to take off. What are my actions going to be? What things do I need to check on the takeoff roll? What speeds do I need to know for this? So just think about those sort of things. You could think about circuits, you know, when am I going to configure? What are my pre-landing checks? What speeds am I going to be flying? What radio calls do I need to make? Stalling, stall recovery. So think about, you know, what do I need to do before I do a stalling exercise? How do I recover from a stall? You know, what is the standard stall recovery? Practice forced landings, go around, really important. An engine failure after takeoff, you know, you're not going to have a lot of time to think about that if it actually happens. So what would your initial actions be? And obviously things like the landing as well. So you can sit there at home, just, you know, shut your eyes. You can put your headset on if you really want to, but just think about the procedure that you're going to be doing for these things. Just as a side note, many of you, and I've chatted to a few of you that I've flown with about using flight sim. Now it's a really cool thing to have. Obviously, if you like flying, you can sit there and fly at home, but it's not entirely realistic to flying a real aeroplane. And so, yes, it's fantastic. You've got the cockpit there. You can actually operate the controls as you would in the aeroplane, albeit by a mouse. So it's useful for that element, but the handling characteristics are obviously going to be very different. So if you're thinking, you know, in the lockdown, I've done loads of flying in a Cessna on flight sim, just remember you might have picked up bad habits. And, you know, if the book says something or your instructor says something, obviously that takes precedence over your tuition of yourself on flight sim. So how can we prepare for our first lesson? Well, as I said, review your last lesson. You know, if you carry a notepad to things like the debrief, firstly, going forward, if you don't do that, going forward, that's a really useful thing to do, just to jot down the things that are mentioned in the debrief. If you have jotted those down, just have a read through, think about the things that you were struggling with or maybe didn't do as well in your last lessons that you need to work on. Look ahead. So hopefully you've got the sort of the flight training book or some sort of syllabus for the PPL. Just look ahead at the next couple of lessons. Don't look too far ahead. That's completely counterproductive, but just look a couple of lessons ahead and think about what's next. A really top tip for you, and I'm sure we've all been there, you know, you're sitting there the night before thinking of these wonderful questions you're going to ask your instructor. You get in the briefing room, I say, you know, any questions? And you go, oh, I can't remember any of them. Write them down. That way you can just work through your questions, answer them, and everything gets resolved. And then finally, depending on which stage of the PPL you're at, and by the way, if you don't know what I'm on about, then you probably haven't learned it, in which case it's not relevant to you. But certainly for some of you that are talking about being on nav flights and solos and things, you know, before that lesson, complete your plog or your flight log, get the routes and the frequencies in there, mass and balance, performance calculations, really important to do that before you come to the club. Just as a quick side note, the chart's renewed on the 25th of March. So unless you've been very proactive and bought one online, you'll need to get one before you go flying next. Just ask James or Reese in the club, or you can get one online. Just make sure you get the right one. Obviously, you want the Southern England 1.5 million chart. So, hooray, it's the day of your lesson. You've woken up, you're thinking, yay, I'm going flying today. I'm just going to talk about a couple of things you need to think about before you rock up to the club ready for your flight. And the first thing is called I'm safe. So it's a personal checklist. You know, we use checklists for the aeroplane. We can actually sort of run through checklists for ourselves. And I think with coronavirus now, this is even more important to actually check whether you're okay to go flying. So the first one is illness. Super important. You know, if you've got any COVID symptoms, you're not feeling well, even, you know, you're just feeling a bit under the weather, it's probably not the best idea to come in flying on that day. So just, you know, phone up, reschedule. It's absolutely not a problem. Medication, obviously you need to check with your AME if you are on anything new. Stress, you know, I sort of mentioned at the start, yes, you're going to feel a little bit anxious before you go flying. It's 100% natural. You know, I was chatting to Finn and Harry before this webinar, and we all are going to feel a little bit anxious going back. You know, it's completely natural. But if you're feeling really stressed and really overwhelmed, then have a discussion with one of us about it, and we can try and work through why you're feeling so worried and try and come up with some remedies. Alcohol and drugs, obviously a big no. Fatigue, you know, if you're not sleeping well, then, you know, just reschedule. And good eating, you know, as Harry said, look after yourself. It's really important. And, you know, making sure you're getting a good night's sleep and eating well before that lesson. So if you're unwell, you know, postpone the flight. It's not a problem. I've said arrive to the club with plenty of time. Now, Finn's going to have a little bit of a chat later on about COVID restrictions, which unfortunately limit what you can do. But what I mean by this is, you know, don't come screeching into the car park, handbrake turn 3 minutes before you're about to take off. You're going to be flustered. Your instructor's going to be flustered. It's not going to be a nice environment. So, you know, arrive early, go down to the pilot hub, get a coffee, sit on a picnic bench outside for a little while. Just, you know, compose yourself before the lesson. Make sure you're comfy as well. Don't wear, you know, really tight t-shirt and you can't reach the throttle. Make sure you're comfortable, nice footwear, things like that. And then obviously when you're in the aeroplane, you know, you might not remember where you had the seat before, you know, where do my feet need to be for the rudders, etc. So just spend a couple of minutes just before we head off, just to think about that. And if you're unhappy with the seat, then just ask your instructor. And really the highlight here is anything you're unhappy about, you know, ask someone. We're not unfriendly people. We're probably sharing some of the same emotions as you guys. So please feel free to just ask us if you're worried about anything. So I'm going to talk to you about some things that you can prepare in terms of coming back and flying again. So I've got the acronym here, WANT. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have not. You know, it's not a requirement to learn this, but it's a nice little structure to think about when you're planning for your flight. So the first one is weather. Then we're going to look at aircraft. We're going to look at NOTAMs, and then finally look at threats. Let's think about the weather then. How do we make sure on that first day, on the 12th of April, hopefully it's going to be lovely, but how do we make sure that it's suitable to fly? Well, hopefully some of you would have seen this before. We've got the Met Office Aviation Briefing Service. James is going to pop a link into the YouTube comments, but it's metoffice.gov.uk. You do need to create an account, but it's free to use, and there's so much information about the weather on there. So we can look at Form 215. So if we go into significant weather low level, and then we have a look at the low level forecast chart, then we get Form 215, which is a nice overview of the country. You can see things like the surface viz, the weather, the cloud, the freezing point, and you can see where the fronts are moving across the country. So you can sort of relay which band we're in if we like, and then we can have a look at the weather. Form 214 in the same place is significant weather low level, and then we can look at the spot wind chart, and it gives you again the whole of the UK, and it gives you the wind altitude, so you can see 1,000 feet, the wind direction and the wind speed, and also the temperature as well. And then look at 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 feet. Just with that, there's little caveats: make sure you've got the right time period selected for your flight, and also make sure you've got the right sort of geographical area. There's no point in looking at the aloft winds in Scotland when you're flying down in Redhill. METARs and TAFs, you can check those on the Met Office as well. There's literally just a search bar, so you can type in your nearest station. So you could look up Gatwick, you get the METAR and the TAF. METAR's decoded for you, TAF you need to decode yourself, but hopefully you're comfortable with doing that sort of thing. Weather charts, you can look at the big picture, which is really useful. So you can see over the next couple of days what sort of weather is going to be moving in. Have a look at the movement of the fronts over the UK. So this chart, if you go on the surface pressure, you get the surface pressure chart. It gives you the pressure, it gives you the fronts moving over, and the isobars as well. And off of the Met Office, there's another really, really useful site called Windy. I'm sure some of you have seen it before. It's a very colourful moving map. And you can filter things, so you can have layers of weather, you can look at the wind, you can look at the cloud, temperature, things like that. And you can really zoom in, so you can have a look at a very localised level, or you can look at a wider level as well. So that's windy.com for that one. So you check your weather, you've come into the club, you're thinking, right, is my aircraft flyable? Well, there's a couple of stages to this one. So first of all, you've got to think about, and this comes back to what I was saying earlier on, do your mass and balance and performance calculations before you get to the club. That's all part of your aircraft checks. If you can't take off because your aircraft's too heavy, then obviously that's going to hamper things. Once you get into the club, you need to check the aircraft documents. So you get the tech log out. You need to have a check through everything, make sure that the aircraft is legal and airworthy to fly. Now, if it's one of your first lessons, then obviously us as instructors, we're going to do this for you. But if you're going solo, or if you're coming up to your PPL skills test, this is stuff you're going to have to start taking ownership for. Especially if you're solo, actually you are PIC of the aeroplane, pilot in command. So it's your responsibility, we will help you, but it's your responsibility to actually make sure the aeroplane you're about to take is legal and airworthy to fly. So we've got the tech log pages. I'm sure some of you have seen these before. If you haven't filled one in, just ask your instructor at some point, and I'm sure they'll show you a sort of suitable point in your training. If it's solo, then you need to start thinking about filling these in yourself. So which documents actually, firstly, should be there, and secondly, how do we check them? Well, I'm just going to have a quick run through. For those of you that are coming up to your skills test, it's really important that you take ownership of this, and actually on the day of your skills test, this is going to be your responsibility. So we'll have a look at a certificate of registration. So it's obtained by the owner of the aeroplane. It doesn't expire. And the things you need to check, you've got the aircraft registration, and just check it's signed and stamped. Really easy one to check. We're then looking for the certificate of airworthiness. So we're making sure that it's got a certificate of airworthiness in the documents folder. Again, it doesn't expire. So we're just checking the aircraft registration, and it's signed and stamped. The airworthiness review certificate is sometimes called ARC. Now, this is where it's going to differ whether you fly Redhill aeroplanes or when you pass your PPL and you might rent off a friend or something. Obviously, all of these documents are required, but they're going to differ in their validity periods, and they're going to differ slightly in the wording as well. So all you need to know really is check the expiry date is the key thing, because some of them will have different periods of validity. So you need the ARC, it does expire, so make sure that you've got the aircraft registration and the expiry date, and it's signed and stamped as well. So a certificate of release to service is more of a complicated one to check. The reason for that is you're going to have a date and a aircraft hours requirement as well. So you'll see on the certificate it says a date, it says some flying hours, and then it says whichever is earlier. So you need to make sure that it satisfies that. Make sure again it's signed and stamped. Noise certificate, you need to check that it's got one, it doesn't expire, and make sure it's got the correct registration and it's signed and stamped. Wait and see if G schedule is hopefully something you'll look at before you've even come to the club, because you'll have done your mass and balance performance calculations. So you need to make sure that it's got the correct aircraft registration, and then it will give you the information about the maximum authorized weight of the aircraft. It will give you the basic weight, the center of gravity, and the moment, which you can feed into your mass and balance calculations. And so it's really important to check that info. Radio license is quite a lengthy document. Obviously, you don't want to read every line of it, but just have a awareness. It's issued by Ofcom. It's a document that does expire, so you need to check the date on that and just check the aircraft registration. And obviously, the aircraft are all insured as well. Again, if you're flying one of our club aeroplanes, then you don't need to scrutinize every detail of this document. But if maybe you're flying, your friend's aeroplane, you need to make sure actually you're insured to fly that. So it's a multi-page document, insured or issued by an insurance company. It will expire. So just make sure you're checking the aircraft registration and the date on there as well. So we've checked our aircraft documents. We're going to have a look at the walk around. So you're going to head out to the aeroplane. Really important things here. First of all, if you haven't done many walkarounds, go out with your instructor. Secondly, if you have done quite a few, but it has been a long time, have your checklist with you and follow that checklist as well. So take your time, use the checklist, and if you're unsure, ask the instructor. There's no point in you thinking, right, I think I remember what everything is, and then you go and check the fuel, and you're like, oh, oil, I'll go and check that, and then, oh, I'll check the inside. You're going to miss things out. So if you follow methodically the checklist and follow the pattern around the aeroplane, then you're not going to miss anything. If on the walk around you are unsure, or something looks dodgy, or something looks different to what you're expecting, just ask somebody in the club before you go flying. So we've checked the weather, we've checked the aircraft. Let's have a look at the NOTAMs then. And this can be a bit of a minefield for those of you that are quite new to checking NOTAMs. So we've got the NATS website. Again, it's free, but you do need a subscription for it. So it's NATS, and you follow the link there. And it gives you a whole page of possible links you can click on. So just highlights of that really. You can get an aerodrome brief. So it comes up, you can pop in loads of aerodromes. So say I was flying from Red Hill to Fair Oaks, I could pop in Red Hill, pop in Fair Oaks, and the time period. So, plus or minus a few hours of when I'm going to be flying. And then it gives you a nice list of all of the NOTAMs relevant to your flight about those aerodromes. You can get a much wider picture. So say you're going on a sort of cross-country flight, you can look at whole FIR, so flight information region. You can see from this picture, really, there's only two that we need to worry about. And unless you're flying a very long distance, you're going to be looking at the London FIR. So you can put in the London FIR, and it's going to give you about a mile worth of text on your screen. It's going to be quite extensive, and it's going to be incredibly wordy. So you can scan read that, see what you think looks relevant on that page. But a top tip from us really is also use a website called NOTAM Info. And what it does is it takes that massive mile-long page of text and condenses it onto a map, so you can see, instead of lat and longs of places, you can actually see a circle, and you can see whether you're anywhere near that when you go flying. So you can see, Red Hill here has got 2 NOTAMs, so you could have a look at those. If you were flying, down towards Lidge, you could have a look at the NOTAMs relevant there as well. So it's notaminfo.com. The final thing was threats. Now, I spoke quite extensively in our webinar 1 about threats and the sort of threats that are going to be existing having not flown for a very long period of time. So I'm not going to labour those points again. If you didn't see that, it's probably worth a little watch in your free time. But what I'm going to say is just come to that first lesson, just having thought about the sort of threats that are going to exist going back to flying. Write them down, have a chat with your instructor before you go flying. It just gets the ball rolling, thinking about that sort of thing. As I said, we covered it in great detail in webinar 1, so you can just go back to the YouTube channel and just have a little watch of that. So finally from me, that first lesson back, ask questions. We're here to help you. Take it slowly. You're not going to be jumping back into the same level that you were before lockdown. Really make the most of that briefing and debriefing. Ask questions, take as much as you can from it. But fourth and finally, the most important thing, enjoy it. As Harry said, there's so many reasons why you might want to be a pilot. And we've spoken about, the barriers to going back, and we've spoken about what's going to be challenging. But actually, it's going to be fun as well. You're going to be up in an airplane again. You're going to be looking at the stunning scenery around. Enjoy that flight. Don't let everything else weigh you down. I'm now going to hand back over to Finn. He's going to have a little bit of a chat about the COVID procedures and just a little bit more information before we answer your questions. So if you do think of anything, just pop it in the comments and we'll answer those as we go along or at the end as well. Okay, give you to Finn.
Thanks, Dan. Some amazing stuff there, I thought, from Harry and Dan. Some of the stuff Harry was saying about how you could build up your activity level before you even get to Red Hill. I think that'd be a really good idea. And yeah, I think really great time to hit the books. And actually, I've thought about hitting the books and doing loads of studying when we first went into lockdown last year. And I found my motivation levels naturally quite low because of the pandemic. So now as those motivation levels start to build up, as we think about how excited we are about getting back airborne again, it's probably time, as we've still got another just under 2 weeks before we can get back in the sky for studying. Anyway, it might be a good time to jump on that motivation horse and hit those books that have been sitting collecting dust in the corner. And yeah, Dan, I really liked what you said there about the I'm safe checklist. We spent so long checking over the aircraft machine and making sure that that's all safe, but it's so easy to forget the human machine that's flying. Speaking of checklists, it's really, really worth revisiting it. Like Dan was saying, make sure that checklist you revise and you're back up to speed with. Don't forget, if you're flying, if you're learning at Red Hill Aviation, that's got to be a Red Hill Aviation checklist that you've got from us. You can get an abbreviated one from our website as well. I'll show you about that in a second. And now it's the time to talk briefly about rules. The pandemic has brought so many rules into our life, a whole host of them. It's kind of sometimes difficult to really keep track of all the different rules. So what I'm going to briefly go over the ones that are applicable when you come to fly with us at Red Hill. And the first really isn't really dictated by us at all. It's sort of the national rules as we come out of this most recent lockdown. And the things I just want to raise, sort of draw your attention to, are really the government advice on travelling places. So make sure that they, and this may change, so I'm being very broad, make sure that you are allowed to travel down to see us. And I think they're likely to ask you to avoid public transport and car sharing as well. And there's probably other things as well inside that. If you want to see the rules in more detail that we're following, don't just listen to us. Head to the Department for Transport General Aviation website. If you just pop that in Google, it'll give you the COVID rules that we're all following. I'm going to go through what we've put in place for Red Hill now, but I don't want to be too much of a downer really, and things are looking really bright, especially with what's going on in the UK. But there's nothing to say that there won't be extra rules in the future in case of any outbreaks. So just pay attention to those, as I'm sure you already do. So let's talk about what happens when you actually, before you get to the club and when you get to the club. The first thing before you get to the club, probably a few days before, we'll send you a form to fill in. you'll have seen this if you flew with us since the pandemic started. Essentially just a declaration that we want you to sign and send back to us to say that you haven't got coronavirus and that no one else around you has had any symptoms or been told to self-isolate, that kind of thing. And like Dan was saying, if you're ever worried about this, if you think you might have, if you're not quite sure, you've got a strange new sniffle or a strange taste sensation or whatever it is, I would say to you, probably don't want that extra stress to bring to the club, to bring to your flying lesson, because you're not going to get the most value out of your flying lesson if you're worrying about that. So best just to be erring on the side of caution. Also, we've put together a back to flying refresher quiz that we're going to email you. And this is very broad, and some of the stuff in it you may not have studied yet if you're just in your early stages of your PPL. There's no grading system that goes into this. You won't be banned from flying or anything. What the aim of this is that your flight instructor will just look at this before you come back to flying, and it's just to see if you need to brush up on any theory that you may have forgotten over the last year or so. It's a very theoretical piece. As I said, any doubt about COVID, just cancel, even if it's 2 minutes before your lesson. Frankly, even if it's 5 minutes into your lesson, we haven't moved yet, just say, look, I have to be honest, there's going to be no hard feelings, probably positive feelings. And this is it. Dan's given you some amazing pointers about things you can prepare to really wow and impress your flight instructor. I think if you came along with all the NOTAM sorted and the weight and balance sorted, then most flight instructors would be very happy indeed. With all that preparation you're doing, please don't come to the club to do it. Please do it at home. And I'd recommend you do it not too late in the night before you come in. Any pre-flight briefings we do, or even debriefings, will be done either outside the club, where there's less risk of any sort of transmission, or via Zoom or video and that kind of thing. And so that's how we'll be doing these. So you won't be going into the briefing rooms. When you come to the club, please just sanitize your hands, and same when you come back in after being in the aircraft. And then the big one really for us is masks. We've learned over the past year how pivotal these are. And not only is this important to keep others safe, but it's also a legal requirement for any aviation buildings. You just must wear your mask inside. So please make sure you wear it properly over your nose. And this goes, the same should be said in the aircraft as well, to make sure you've got it on in the aircraft as well. Social distance when you come to the club, please just stay away from other instructors, other people working there that have to be in that premises. And also please just spend as little time as possible in the club. We would love for it to go back to being like a real social hub, and it will soon, but to get there we first have to just follow these rules really for the next however long. So if you've got anything you need to do after your flying lesson, if you need to pop in, maybe you're thinking, Finn, I need to come in because I need to pay the operations team for the flight we've just done. Well, that's now going to be possible over the phone or online. The link can be sent to you, so you can just pay like that. And we've been using this liquid called Bacoban, which kills viruses for over 7 days. But it should be noticed that it can be washed off by rain and stuff like that. So what we do is we Bacoban every sort of part of the aircraft that we think could be touched every 7 days. But between every flight, and if you're coming to fly with us, your instructor will ask you to go and do this before you go and do the lesson, is just to go and clean all the touch points and all the external areas you might touch. So that's the handles on the Cessnas for climbing on the wings, that's the door handles, the controls inside, that sort of thing, and the keys as well, don't forget about those. If you are, and I know a few of you said you were about to start doing your navigation section of your PPL, really exciting, great bit of the PPL to be doing. You'll get to go to lots of other airfields, but just be aware of their rules and restrictions. So as Dan was showing us how to check the NOTAMs, and if you don't understand what they mean, some of them are written in complicated language, then just ask your flight instructor for a bit of clarification. And also, even if it's somewhere you wouldn't normally phone before you go to, such as a headcorn, for example, then in this case, we're suggesting everyone just phone up, get a briefing on what to expect when you get there. It might be some different rules, such as you might have to pay over the phone before you get there. You might have to book a slot. all sorts of things. Just whatever they are, find out their rules and just respect them. So we've gone through tons of stuff today. I'm going to point you in some other places where you can find more information, or even information that just backs up what we've been saying. So the first place I'll probably point you towards is your PPL books, the Pooley's ones, the ones we recommend at Redhill. Also, other places you can go for more information are the Redhill Aerodrome website. So some things I think you should probably get printed out and get in an e-board are the diagram about how to join the circuit. Can be complicated sometimes. An airfield chart, we've got one of those up there to download. And also, yes, that's from Redhill Aerodrome. And then if you go to Redhill Aviation, from our website, you can get a sheet that's going to help you do your RT. And also you can get an abbreviated form of the checklist that we use. The Skyway Code is this brilliant book that's free from the CAA. Amazing stuff. You can pay to have a printed out one, but if you're just happy with the digital version, if you just Google Skyway Code, or I think it's in the links below this video, they've just released a new one that's got all the updated Brexit restrictions on it. So you can download that for free. Also, shameless plug here, if you want more content similar to this, head to my YouTube or my Instagram channel, Fly with Finn. There's some stuff there. I'm going to do one soon about weight and balance calculations and NOTAM, there's tons of stuff relevant to us there. Also, GASCO, we've got a really interesting sort of self-led webinar on getting back in the air flying. And there's also another website that we're big fans of here called airspace-safety.com. Watch that. It's all about infringements and that kind of thing. So if you're coming towards your nav section, really good website to look at. Okay, so we've all spoken for a long, long time, really. And if you enjoyed hearing what we said and you will hear more of it, or maybe you're the kind of person that every time your hand hovers over the transmit button for the radio, you have a pang of anxiety, or maybe you're not sure what to say, or you're scared of getting it wrong. And me and Dan Harry were talking about this before we came in the seminar today, actually, and we are absolutely with you. It's a scary place, the radio, and we felt anxiety before we made our first transmissions as well. So if you find yourself tongue-tied, we're going to talk about how to master those radio transmissions. Radio transmissions are kind of the only way an air traffic controller has to judge how good you are. So you kind of want to put on your best impression, and also it's a really good way of impressing not only your instructor, but your examiner when you come to taking the PPL test. So come along quite soon, actually next week, 6th of April. We're doing one that's open to all. It's going to be open, sort of accessible by all levels, whether you're a PPL student or if you've got friends or you are watching this and you have got a license and fly out of anywhere. Really, we're going to tailor it to Redhill, but if you fly out of anywhere in the southeast, it'd be really useful for you. 6 p.m. local again. And that'll be on YouTube. The link will be sent out to you. Or even better, if you want to come fly with us, you can start booking in now. We're open from the 12th of April. So, as I was saying a second ago, we've spoken a lot. We've covered loads and loads of different subjects. What we're going to do now is really open up for some questions. If you've got any questions you want to put in the chat, maybe it's something about returning to flying, maybe it's something about something Dan or Harry have said, then let us know. We already had a question earlier from Charlie, who's taken some, he took some UK EASA PPL exams, theory exams. He took quite a lot of them, actually. He was saying he only had a few to go. And he was saying, will they still be valid? If you started your exams and did them through us at Redhill, they're still valid going on. You've got until the end of 2022, I think I'm right in saying, to have got your PPL pass in your hand. So they'll be valid for a PPL up to the end of 2022. Let's see if we've got any more questions here. We've got a question from Simon, one of our instructors, who I think is eager to get back in the air himself. He's put his email address there. So yeah, I'm going to take a second to look through some of these questions, but please ask away. There's no question too stupid, no question that me or Dan and Harry haven't asked before.
I'm just going to show you very quickly, thanks Finn, just about how we can access the checklist just from the Redhill website. So if you just go on to Redhill Aviation, you can go on to initial training and then downloads. And then once you're there, there's loads of really useful things, as Finn was saying. But as you can see here, you've got PA28 checklist, you've got Hazel and Hell checks as well, you know, your pre-landing checks, really useful info on there. So if you just head on there, download it, print it out before your flight. If you haven't got a checklist, just make sure you've got the Red Hill Aviation one for your lessons. Any other questions coming through, please do let us know.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Andrew, for popping that on there. He says if you took the exams elsewhere, so not at Red Hill, if they were still taken in the UK, so it was another school, maybe you flew out before, or through, sometimes you have big PPL online courses, or sort of big week-long courses where you can do all your PPL ground exams in. If you took any there and they were in the UK through the UK EASA system, then absolutely fine. In fact, even if you took them abroad until the end of 2022, but if you took them in the UK, there's basically no change to what will happen for you. But yeah, great question, Andrew. Thanks for asking that. I'm looking forward to flying again with you when we get back in the air. And so no real other questions there. So guys, thanks for coming along to this webinar. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you liked this, then please come along to our next one. And unless Dan or Harry, you got anything to add to this?
Not from me, but thank you all for joining. Hope to see you for the RT one soon.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you all when we reopen on the 12th of April.
Cool. Thanks, guys. We'll see you at the next one. Take care.
Bye-bye.